your butts.
So yeah, I wanted to go into Psalm 22.
Oh yeah.
People in the
Let's
chat have been asking about that.
Okay, so let's talk about this.
Yes.
Do you want to tee up the issue here, because you know something about this, right?
Yeah. So let me read this real quick. I'm going to start with verse 12. Psalms 22:12. Many bulls surround me, strong bulls, and Bashan encircle me. Roaring lions, they tear at their prey, open their mouth wide against me. I'm poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart turns to wax as it melts within me. My mouth is dried up like a pot shred, and my tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. You lay me in the dust of death. Dogs surround me. A pack of villains encircle me. They pierce my hands and my feet. All my bones are on display. People stare and gloat over me. They divide my clothing among and cast lots for my garment. So when I first started looking into this, or the reason I started looking into this, is I knew crucifixion was not a thing in David's kingdom. So I was like, deconstructing for my Christian brain, I was like, oh, this is prophecy. And now I'm looking at it more objectively and like, wait. Your hands being pierced doesn't make sense. He's talking about, animals tearing apart his body in various different ways before and after this passage. So like suddenly he's being nailed to something. So I started looking into it, and that's ultimately how I discovered you, Dr. Kipp, in the episode you did on Myth Vision. It was fantastic because it's ultimately it was mistranslated in the Septuagint. Is that correct? And it actually means they.
Go ahead. How do I put this? So the word in the Greek is horoxon, which means to dig. So the passage in Greek literally says they dug my hands and my feet. In the Hebrew, it's ka'ari, which means like a lion. And so the whole verse says, dogs surround me like a lion, my hands and my feet. And that's the literal translation. One of the arguments from apologists is that this reading in the Hebrew, like a lion, my hands and my feet, must be a scribal error because it doesn't make any sense. There's no verb in there. And it seems strange. Like, what does that mean? One of the reasons why that's an argument to be rejected on the face of it is because when you read through Hebrew poetry, you will suddenly encounter a very frustrating lack of verbs within sentences. It's not unusual for Hebrew poetry to be replete with all sorts of very, very strange sentence constructions. So I would say at the outset, it's not a very good argument. One of the rules of textual criticism is this statement that says the more difficult reading is probably the more accurate one. That is to say, scribes throughout antiquity were constantly fixing the text. So if you encounter something that's really difficult, chances are good that, and if it's different from something that looks a lot simpler and cleaner, there's a good chance that this is something that's been cleaned up or polished. So that's not really what's happening with this particular passage. What's happening here is the Septuagint translator has encountered a manuscript written in Hebrew, which is either written such that the vavs, the letter vav and the letter yod in the manuscript look very, very close to one another. And this is common. In the Second Temple period, you encounter manuscripts all the time where these two letters look very, very similar to one another. So instead of reading ka'ari, he read keru, which some have suggested could be a form, and that's kof, aleph, resh, vav, as opposed to kof, aleph, resh, yod. Kof, aleph, resh, yod is like a lion. Kof, aleph, resh, vav on its own doesn't mean anything. But there is a verb in Hebrew, kof resh vav, keru, which means they dug. This could be a lengthened form of that word. And this is something we see in manuscripts from the Dead Sea Scrolls, where scribes will frequently employ vowel letters because this is a consonantal language. There's no vowel pointing as early as, the first century. So they would throw in helping vowel letters for pronunciation. We think, we don't know, but this is what we think probably. So the argument is that this is what this is. Keru is a lengthened form of the verb, meaning, they dug. That was, mistranscribed from ka'ari. Either misunderstood by the writer of the translator of the Septuagint, or he was reading from a manuscript that had confused these letters and written a vav instead of a yod. So this is a scribal error. And the Septuagint translator comes to this passage and he's like, I don't know what this is. I don't know what it means, but it sure looks like this Hebrew word, keru. So I'm going to translate it with horaxam, which means they dug. So they dug my hands and my feet. That on its own doesn't really make any sense either. And for a number of years, Christian apologists have been looking at this passage and saying, well, dug is like boring a hole in something, so this could be digging or boring holes in the hands and the feet. So he pierced my hands and my feet. So this is where the reading came from. Now, how do we know this is a scribal error? It's been suggested that the Dead Sea Scrolls actually support the Septuagint reading. I would say yes and no. There's one manuscript from Qumran, the Nachal Hever Psalm scroll, that dates to the early 2nd century. It preserves this reading. It's poorly preserved, but I would say that yes, it preserves this reading of Kof Aleph Resh Vav Keru, which, as I said, on its own doesn't mean anything, but under certain conditions, you could construe that to be a lengthened form of the verb keru, meaning they dug, which is probably what the Septuagint translator was looking at. Now, the problem with this scroll, and the question with regards to this scroll right away is this an original reading, or is this a scribal error? Apologists fall on the side of this as an original reading. You'll hear Dr. Michael Brown has said yes. James White has said yes. Here we have a manuscript from the Dead Sea Scrolls that preserves the reading preserves the reading. They pierced my hands and my feet. I actually have there's a video lecture out there of Professor Peter Flint, who was one of my teachers actually at Trinity Western University, saying this. We have a scroll now. We have a fragment. So here's the question. Is this an original reading, or is this just a scribal error? And I fall on the side of scribal error, and here is why. And I told you I got the coup de grace here. This is it. And it's a technical argument. So there's a term that we use called orthography when studying scripts and studying texts in antiquity, and it has to do basically with spelling. There was no universal spelling conventions in the ancient world. Unfortunately not. People in antiquity were terrible spellers.
It's oral.
And they were inventive spellers.
Creativity at its finest.
Creative. As I mentioned, we have a number of manuscripts in the Dead Sea Scrolls which preserve what's called a long orthography. That is, lots of words that preserve vowel letters. So the argument goes, this is just an instance of long orthography. This case within this particular manuscript where it says Kof Aleph Resh Vav is a long form of spelling Keru. Now, the problem with this argument is that orthography is always manuscript specific. What that means is A scribe who is writing orthographically long will write orthographically long from the beginning of the manuscript to the end of the manuscript. A scribe who's writing orthographically short of this particular manuscript, is this an orthographically long manuscript? What do you think the answer is?
No.
No, it's not. It's
Yeah,
not orthographically long. In fact, Professor Flint, who was the editor of the scroll and should have known better, he said that the orthography in this manuscript is not just defective, it's extremely defective.
Wow.
Even more defective than the Masoretic text. So what does this mean? This means that this particular manuscript almost certainly has preserved a scribal error, because the scribe is not prone to writing anything with vowel letters, especially not a word like keru, which, would be odd. So in the end, we have the original reading, the preferred reading, which is ka'ari, like a lion, my hands and my feet, which was misread or mistranscribed or miscopied at some point in its history. And we have an example of this, of, a case where it was miscopied in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the translator of the Septuagint either saw a manuscript like this, or he misread the letters himself and translated with horaksan, which means they dug. Here's one other important factor in this whole discussion. Where is Psalm 22:17 ever quoted in the New as a fulfilled prophecy of Jesus's crucifixion?
That's another big problem, because it's not prophetic. It's David lamenting his struggles as king.
Yeah.
More or less.
So the point I'm making here is that the New Testament authors, if they had this reading available to them, what are the chances that they're going to miss it when piecing together passages from Psalm 22 as a description of Jesus' crucifixion? Are they going to pass up the chance to quote Psalm 22:17 or 16 in the English? Most likely not. I think the fact that not a single New Testament writer ever quoted this particular verse as a form of fulfilled prophecy or as with reference to Jesus' crucifixion says a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, they quoted all sorts of other stuff from Psalm 22.
They love quoting Psalms. They love it.
Absolutely. So the fact that they don't suggests very strongly to me that they did not have it. And then all the other ancient evidence suggests that the way this passage happened, the way that the reason we're here where we are today with apologists banging us on the head with Psalm 22:17 is because a scribe made an error. A scribe made an error. A scribe made an error.
It's a logical conclusion. It is.
It's weird though that they
it's
have
the tricky part, but it's a lot.
They have the part about dividing your garments by casting lots. Like that is in the gospel. So it seems like maybe they had access to it, or they were familiar with that.
They had access to the psalm
to make the narrative. But...
They totally did, and I would argue that actually speaks pretty powerfully against the idea of they pierced my hands and feet as an original reading, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
why wouldn't they?
The Passion narrative is crafted around Psalm 22.
Yeah.
So if you're going to craft it around Psalm 22 and the guy's being crucified by nails on a tree, are you going to miss this opportunity to talk about that?
Hold on to your butts.